I probably got things wrong with my last video. This is a video about those things that I got wrong. For those of you who don't know me, hi, I'm September. So this isn't like a full proper video essay, but I'm going to be yapping about the research of a video essay I posted a few weeks back. Feel free to watch that if you haven't yet. It might make more sense if you do that first. Anyways, I just ended my exam season, and I'm glad to say that I didn't fail any courses this semester, so I can really dedicate my summer to more videos and creative projects beyond my usual school-time engineering. But before I make another essay, I figured my first one needed some more backing and a little bit of critique, so I'll split my various sections accordingly, timestamps on screen.
You were the shadow to my light, did you feel us?
I heard it's always good to begin with a statement of personal bias and my own personal stakes in this essay. Now, I don't believe in Valentinian or Cephian Gnosticism myself, nor do I hold to any flavor of Gnosticism in general. I am personally within the tradition of Eastern Orthodox Christianity, an institution and system of belief that has historically opposed various different forms of Gnosticism and treated them as erroneous interpretations of theology and philosophy. However, I find Gnosticism to be intensely interesting due to its impact and influence on much of modern media, especially the Japanese video game tradition, and by extension, Genshin Impact. Therefore, I attempted to be as neutral and objective as I could with my framing and portrayal of Gnostic beliefs in theology. However, I do apologize if you find any wording that I may have used that may have been seen as polemical. Alright, elephant in the room, I have not played Genshin. Hopefully this was made abundantly clear in the original essay. However, if it was not, I must reiterate that I have indeed never played it. The closest I have gotten is trying to install it on my laptop back in 2020, but given that it had some rather abysmal specs, it never really even finished installing, and I just went back to playing Flash games. Therefore, I'm basically a total outsider to the game. I don't have any first-hand experience of gameplay or lore, and I'm relying almost entirely on two primary sources: original interviews with players and the wiki, as well as in-game texts that are described there. As a result, I do think there are two interesting outcomes as a result of my work. One, I haven't built a definitive or authoritative lore document by any means, but rather a fully speculative framework which is supported by some in-game evidence, but it isn't a definitive "this theory is necessarily true." It's a mapping, not a territory, and even though the interview with Pash is a big piece of starting evidence that supports ish the rest of my thinking and logic, like my amazing comments section pointed out, I definitely missed a lot. Thank you for pointing it out, by the way. But secondarily, I think that approaching the game theology first instead of lore first or character first may have led to some interesting insights as well, since I don't have any particular emotional attachment to any character in-game other than my goat, Ip Gaming. I may actually be less biased in that department, though of course it doesn't rule out the possibility of bias elsewhere. Now, a big issue I'd like to point out is I lack significant engagement with source material. My primary expertise is in the specific background information about Gnostic systems, and as such, I may have overlooked the same level of academic rigor for Genshin itself. Because of the nature of my assignment and my own research priorities, the process for my writing was optimized for Gnostic sources instead of dialogue trees. Therefore, it's a significant oversight that I do need to come clean about. But I'm aiming for my next essay to incorporate a lot more in-game and textual sources, so if you got any good sources on Nahida, feel free to drop it in the comments. Now, I used a couple of heuristics and assumptions in my essay, some of which were possibly wrong. For example, the assumption that the Sea of Stars was necessarily a paradisian, which apparently it's a dying and hostile universe according to multiple comments I've gotten. The False Sky as being definitively a method of imprisonment rather than a protectorate sphere was also likely a fan theory that I internalized that I couldn't actually find significant in-game strong evidence for via wiki that definitively defines it as such. So I'm going to hold the assumption that it's an interpretation that I heuristically used without questioning. Another would be the idea that Faunus was the original creator of Teyvat. They were not, even though I knew better. I completely missed everything about Nibelung and the Abyss, though it doesn't actually change that much about my interpretations despite adding a bunch of interesting new complications and implications. I do think that my current framework is weak enough to warrant a full video disputing and correcting my claims eventually, just like St. Augustine. So I kind of mentioned this in the essay. Gnosticism as a category is really disputed, but I kind of just glossed over it. I think it does deserve its own little section here. As Williams and Wyss argue, Gnosticism is not that great of a descriptor. The actual lines between different sects of Gnosticism are similarly a historiographical invention imposed upon the raw data. The clean lines between Cephian beliefs and Valentinian beliefs may be significantly more fuzzy than we truly understand, since we do know that ideas and traditions would mix and syncretize. We do know the general shape of Valentinian ideas via Against Heresies and texts within Nag Hammadi, which some of which are labeled as Valentinian, albeit by commentators, or they align strongly with external descriptions of Valentinian theology, similarly for Sephian ideas. Now, a truly 100% historically accurate reading, however, would be like, actually, these categories don't really exist. Heuristically, however, I do actually use these categories. The category of Gnosticism, while neither monolithic nor an entirely accurate grouping of different Gnostic traditions, is still useful in the scope that I'm working with. It assumes Gnosticism is a defined category even if non-monolithic, and elements from different traditions appear to be synthesized within. It would make sense, therefore, to group and categorize those elements as we have received the categories, without worrying about whether or not the categories themselves are valid. I'm not arguing ultimately over whether the arbitrary lines we draw between Gnostic ideas are valid or not. I'm asking what ideas Genshin actually uses, and where on the lines they map. Okay, so Irenaeus of Lyons, he's a known polemicist and a staunch anti-Gnostic. As a result, his words should always be taken with several grains of salt, as he was intentionally trying to disprove the Gnostics in favor of proto-Orthodox, anti-Nicene Christian theology. I'm not going to pretend he was trying to be neutral. This guy, just actually hates Gnosticism, and his writing reflected that. I mean, his work Against Heresies is literally named that, Against Heresies. Gnosticism was seen as a heresy by the big IOL. That said, Irenaeus is a necessary starting point. He was one of the only contemporaneous witnesses of Valentinianism that we have access to, and we don't have significant reason to believe that everything he described was completely made up and strawmanned. His descriptions of Valentinianism also mirror the ideas described in the Tripartite Tractate and other key works. He does seem to be one of the only polemicists that actually took Valentinians seriously enough to describe their actual beliefs, even if it was just to tear them down anyways. Now, I'm sure that many of the arguments and points that I put forth in my main essay have been repeated time and time again in the existing Genshin world, particularly the false sky and Arknight theories. None of these are particularly new material, even if a few angles may be. This was partly a consequence of my approach, partly a time constraint, but because I approached this theology first, I was unable to verify what points I bring forth have been definitively and fully elaborated on already by others. However, do note that my attempted contributions were again sourced from an outside perspective looking for parallels inward, not from an inside perspective looking for parallels outward. My approach was independent and my primary original contributions focused specifically on analyzing the schools of Gnosticism drawn on by Genshin. The Valentinian reading and the Tianli etymological analysis, as well as the Gnosis etymological and cross-linguistic analysis, are my own attempts at contributions. As far as I'm aware, I have not seen any others discuss these points articulated in the same way as me, but if they have, then please share.
That's why I don't go to Denny.
On the note of Genshin sources, the original Patch Magazine interview was in Japanese. I was working with an already translated Mandarin transcription, which I then translated into English. I understand that three-layer translation isn't ideal, but if something important or some nuance was lost in translation, hopefully a Japanese speaker can help me out too. Clarence Woodman. He is a seminary student and a YouTuber that I've interviewed for his expertise in Kenite Greek. I use his definitions, but he's not a particular specialist on Gnostic scholarship, and uses biblical hermeneutic as a reference point for philology. Even so, I should have cross-referenced his definitions with standard lexical sources like BDAG, Strong or Little Scott, and cited those as well. This is an oversight that I will correct in future work, but I do think it is also important to know the biases of my secondary sources too. Boring stuff out of the way, that's probably it for my methods and points. If there's anything else to talk about, mention it down below and I'll either address it in my proper attractions video, or maybe even the next one. The topic next time is going to be Nahida and Akamoth by an overwhelming community vote. Speaking of community, I do need to find a Nahida main who can yap about her lore, so that I don't have to keep researching her alone in my dark and sad and depressing bedroom and look like a gooner to my parents. Also, Akamoth is just such a fun word to say, you know? Akamoth. Akamoth. And I'm pretty sure it's a voiceless velar fricative. It's just so fun to pronounce. I could pronounce it the English way by hardening the chi to a k, like Akamoth, but that's boring, you know? Anyways, I'm September, and hopefully I will see you next time.